Recently, I started flying an Appeal to Heaven flag alongside the American flag from our backyard flagpole. Until recently, I knew nothing about the Appeal to Heaven flag, but Justice Sam Alito of the United States Supreme Court changed all of that for me when the news media went crazy over the Alito family flying an upside-down American flag, which of course is a distress signal, together with an Appeal to Heaven flag. The social thought police sounded the alarm that something had to be done to prevent a Supreme Court justice from calling on heaven for help. The fact that Alito's prayers were being made from the privacy of his own home seemed to be lost. The fact that even judges have First Amendment rights to freely exercise their religious beliefs didn't seem to matter. And the protesters appeared to be oblivious to the historical significance of the flag and the role that God played in the formation of this one nation under God. Joseph Reed, the personal secretary to George Washington, designed the Appeal to Heaven flag. In 1775, the Appeal to Heaven flag was displayed on colonial military ships in recognition of our need for heaven's intervention to free the colonies from the tyranny of British government overreach. The Appeal to Heaven flag is sometimes referred to as the pine tree flag because a pine tree is shown on the flag under the words, "An Appeal to Heaven." During the early years of this nation, Great Britain restricted the cutting of certain lumber, except as ordered for shipment back to England. In 1690, the British philosopher John Locke wrote his second treatise on the civil government. That volume stated that governments answer to God, and therefore, when government imposes unjust orders, the people have a right to appeal to God. Locke's assertion has support in Scripture. At Judges chapter 11, verse 27, the king of Israel responded to an adversary king with an appeal to heaven, saying, "Let the Lord, the judge, decide the dispute this day between the Israelites and the Ammonites." In the New Testament, governments are subservient to God. Scripture reads, "There is no authority except that which God has established." That's Romans 13, verse 1. Early settlers in this land and the founding fathers of this nation openly recognized God's supremacy. They selflessly committed themselves to preserving godly principles for this country. The charters of many of the original colonies and founding documents such as the Mayflower Compact reflect a dedication to God as the primary motivation for establishing communities here in America. On July the 4th, 1776, when Congress declared our independence from Great Britain, the founders of this country asserted that God has endowed mankind with certain unalienable rights, and that this nation would rely on the protection of divine providence to assert those rights. The founders ended that document by pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to upholding God's authority. The author John Mark Comer, in his book titled Practicing the Way, observed this: "Early generations," he said, "build up through selflessness. Later generations tear down through selfishness." That has been the cycle of all great cultures in this world, and it appears to be the course that our nation is currently traveling. Our founders selflessly sacrificed to preserve God's prominence in government. But today, God is systematically removed from public government, substituting personal gain over public good. Now more than ever, we need to appeal to God's higher authority to right the course of our nation. Demonic influences in our culture seek to eviscerate the national motto of "In God We Trust." Efforts to unify our country as one nation under God are derided by those who deny the foundations upon which this country was built. At great personal sacrifice, this land became set apart to become a more perfect union. Colonies openly organized around godly principles, respecting faith in God as essential for the public good. Sunday closing laws, just as an example, honored godly principles of observing a Sabbath day. Today, Chick-fil-A is ridiculed as one of the few businesses to observe God's standards at work. Government oppression in the form of laws designed to remove godly principles from our communities warrant an appeal to the forces of heaven. Intervention by God is needed to overturn this blanket of deception that is covering the society in which we live. Absent an appeal to God, like that demonstrated by our founders, selfish instincts will continue to push people to disavow the wisdom of God's directives for the public good. Instead, forces of evil will push for further division among people and will substitute self-interest where God's call is for selflessness. This nation did not achieve greatness without God's influence. Judeo-Christian principles once set the tone for social structures in our country and promoted civic-minded sacrifice for the sake of our country. But dark forces of evil are at work, seeking to deny the history of this nation and to demonize its institutions in order to infect social consciousness with a sense of hopelessness and division. Jesus taught us to be selfless, to love God and to sacrificially love others. See, for example, Luke 10:27 and 28. The parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10:25 through 37, and the description Jesus gave of judgment among the nations, read that in Matthew 25:32, demonstrate the importance of maintaining godly influence over our land. And when the forces of evil seek to destroy godly influence in our nation, we have the absolute right and frankly the duty to appeal to heaven. So as we ponder the need for an appeal to God for the sake of this nation, consider these questions for introspection, if you will. Question number 1, what examples come to mind of evil displacing godly standards that were once recognized in this country? Question number 2, how can we take a stance for godliness in our nation? And question number 3, what issues do we need to be appealing to heaven? A wide range of social issues such as God's standards for marriage, the composition of families, gender and gender roles, the importance of Israel, just to name a few, need to be restored to godly standards. But the most shocking defiance of God's principles is the idea that an appeal to heaven is socially unacceptable. There is no substitute for demonstrating an alliance with God. We need to speak out, stand out, and withstand the temptation to allow the light of God in us to be snuffed out. The flag promoting an appeal to heaven is making resurgence as Christians are openly seeking God's influence in our social structures. In the normal course of life, there will be differences among us. Not everyone will subscribe to God's influence. After all, God designed us with free will. But we must preserve the God-given right to make an appeal to God whenever the forces of this world defy the life principles established for us by the Creator of the universe. Now more than ever, we need to recognize God's truthful living, and now more than ever, we need to selflessly but boldly respond to quash the forces of evil that are prevalent in the world today.